Tuesday morning, I was stirring instant coffee with a plastic spoon when I opened my banking app and felt my world tilt sideways like a house of cards in an earthquake. The promotion bonus I'd earned by single-handedly saving the Morrison account gone. Not delayed, not pending, just vanished like it had never existed. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned, then checked again. Same result. The $18,000 that was supposed to compensate me for 3 months of 14-hour days, weekend calls with neurotic clients, and fixing everyone else's mistakes while they got credit for my solutions. System glitch, mumbled Darren from accounting, not even looking up from his CrossFit protein shake. His tone had the same energy as someone explaining why the sky is blue to a toddler bored, dismissive, final. But I caught the smirk he shared with Blaine from HR across the break room. The kind of look that said they'd practiced this conversation in the mirror. I knew better. This wasn't my first rodeo with corporate theft disguised as administrative errors. Last year, my quarterly incentive accidentally got redistributed to the team after I'd done 80% of the work alone. The year before, my patent submission for the client onboarding automation mysteriously became a collaborative effort with 3 names I'd never worked with. But this time felt different. This time, they weren't even pretending to respect my intelligence. The all-hands meeting that afternoon was a masterclass in gaslighting wrapped in corporate speak. The CEO, Vernon, stood at the front of the conference room like a motivational poster come to life, all gleaming teeth and empty promises. We're streamlining our compensation structure, he announced, to better reflect our commitment to team-based success. Translation: we're stealing from individuals to pad our profit margins and calling it innovation. I sat in the back row, nodding along like a good little soldier while my mind catalogued every slight, every stolen idea, every moment of recognition that had been redirected to someone with a different chromosome configuration. 3 years of watching mediocre men get promoted over my expertise. 3 years of training my own replacements who couldn't spell analytics without autocorrect. 3 years of being called too aggressive when I advocated for my ideas and not leadership material when I stayed quiet. But here's what Vernon and his executive boys club didn't know: I hadn't been sitting idle these past few months. While they were playing corporate chess with what they thought was an expendable pawn, I'd been quietly building my own game board. 2 weeks ago, I'd registered Meridian Strategic Solutions, clean, professional, forgettable enough to fly under their radar. Nothing flashy, just my initials woven into something that sounded like it belonged on the 40th floor of a glass tower, not in the industrial park wasteland they called headquarters. Every time I updated a client file, I'd already been creating a pristine backup on my personal cloud. Not stealing, redundancy. The same redundancy I'd proposed in last quarter's IT meeting, while they laughed and called it paranoid over-engineering. They weren't laughing now. They were about to learn the hard way that the quiet girl who automated their entire workflow knew exactly where all the digital bodies were buried. The breaking point came during Vernon's closing remarks. He looked directly at me, the first time he'd acknowledged my existence in months, and said, "Shally, your dedication to process improvement has been noted. Sometimes the best reward is knowing you've contributed to something bigger than yourself." The condescension dripped from his voice like honey from a broken jar. Something inside me snapped so cleanly it sounded like a champagne flute hitting marble. I smiled back at him, the kind of smile that probably looked grateful from his perspective, but felt like drawing a blade from behind my teeth. "Thank you, Vernon," I said, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "It's good to know my contributions are valued." But in my head, I was already 3 moves ahead, watching his entire operation crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. Because while Vernon was congratulating himself on cost-cutting measures, I was about to show him what real strategic thinking looked like. That night, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine and pulled up my Mirror server. Everything was there: client histories, communication logs, project timelines, the custom automation scripts I'd written that kept their entire operation running smoothly. All of it backed up, organized, and ready to transition seamlessly to my new platform. I opened a new document and began typing. "Dear valued clients, I wanted to personally reach out to inform you of an exciting transition. To ensure continued excellence in service delivery, your accounts will be migrated to Meridian Strategic Solutions, where you'll receive the same dedicated attention you've come to expect." I didn't hit send. Not yet. But just writing it felt like breathing fresh air after years of suffocating in corporate smog. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again, not the version of me that had been ground down by their systematic dismissal, but the version that had built their entire digital infrastructure from scratch. My phone buzzed. A text from my colleague Priya. Did you hear? They're having an emergency IT review tomorrow. Something about system vulnerabilities. I laughed out loud. Vulnerabilities. They had no idea. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of gray sky that makes fluorescent office lighting look like a blessing. I walked into the building same as always, past the motivational posters about synergy and disruptive innovation, past the reception desk where Neela always gave me a knowing look that said we both understood exactly how much of a joke this place was. But something was different. The usual background hum of productivity was replaced by the tense whispers of a crisis in motion. Developers hunched over screens with the kind of panic usually reserved for emergency room triage. The marketing team stood in confused clusters, gesturing at blank dashboards and frozen analytics. I set my bag down and logged into my workstation. The company's CRM loaded with agonizing slowness, then displayed a message that made my coffee taste like victory. Database connection timeout. Please contact your system administrator. I waited. It didn't take long. 9:23 a.m. Company-wide Slack notification, urgent. If you're experiencing issues with client data access, do not attempt manual workarounds. IT is investigating. Updates to follow. I sipped my coffee and watched the chaos unfold like a conductor watching an orchestra hit every wrong note in perfect unison. My direct supervisor, Garrett, burst out of his office with the kind of red-faced panic that suggested his entire career was flashing before his eyes. "Shally," he barked, as if I were a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. "You built most of these systems, right? Can you figure out what's happening?" I looked up from my screen with the practiced expression of concerned helpfulness. "I can take a look," I said, already knowing exactly what I'd find. Might be related to the server migration I recommended last quarter. He waved me off with the same dismissive gesture he'd used when I'd first proposed the migration. "Just fix it. Whatever it takes." But I didn't fix it. I sat at my desk and watched the dominoes fall exactly as I designed them to. Because while Garrett was treating me like tech support, I was already 3 companies ahead, watching my carefully orchestrated exit strategy unfold in real time. My phone lit up with the first client message at 10:47 a.m. "Shally, we're having trouble accessing our project dashboard. Is everything okay on your end?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I opened my laptop to a different screen, one showing Meridian Strategic Solutions' pristine client portal, fully functional and ready for business. Every piece of data they needed was there, organized, accessible, and completely independent of the burning wreckage that used to be my day job. The second message came from our biggest client: "Whatever's happening with your systems, we need continuity. Can you handle our account directly?" That's when I knew it was time. I stood up, walked to Garrett's office, and knocked on his door frame. He looked up from his phone with the expression of a man who just realized he was standing in quicksand. "I think I found the problem," I said, my voice steady and professional. "It's going to take some time to fix. In the meantime, I'll handle client communication directly to minimize disruption." He nodded frantically, probably thinking I was about to save his career. "Yes, whatever you need. Just keep them happy." I smiled. "Don't worry. They'll be in excellent hands." By Thursday, the full scope of the crisis had become clear to everyone except the people who needed to understand it most. The IT team had brought in contractors. The CFO had called 3 emergency meetings. Vernon himself had been spotted in the server room, looking like a man who just realized he'd been playing poker with someone who could see his cards. But the real beauty of my strategy wasn't in the technical execution, it was in the psychological warfare. Every time they tried to contact a client, they were redirected to Meridian Strategic Solutions. Every time they attempted to access critical data, they found themselves locked out of systems they'd never bothered to understand. I hadn't stolen anything. I'd simply made them realize how much they'd been taking for granted. My phone rang. Vernon. I let it ring twice before answering. "Shally," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled desperation. "I think we need to have a conversation." "Of course," I replied, already knowing exactly how this would go. "What can I help you with?" "Look," he said, switching to the tone he probably used to charm investors. "I know there have been some misunderstandings. But you're clearly a valuable asset, and I think it's time we had a more formal discussion about your role here. I stared out my apartment window at the city skyline, thinking about all the times I'd looked at those same buildings and wondered when I'd get my chance to play in the big leagues. I appreciate that, Vernon, but I'm afraid I'm no longer available for employment. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear his breathing change. What do you mean? I said, opening my laptop to show the Meridian Strategic Solutions homepage. I'm already employed. By myself. Friday morning, I woke up to 17 new client inquiries and a certified letter that made me laugh so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. Legal action. Intellectual property theft. Breach of contract. The usual corporate tantrum thrown by people who'd never bothered to read the fine print of their own employment agreements. I forwarded it to my attorney, a sharp woman named Raina who specialized in exactly this kind of corporate overreach, and went back to onboarding my newest client, a tech startup that had been burned by my former company's incompetence 6 months ago. The irony was perfect. They were suing me for building something they'd never appreciated, using skills they'd never compensated fairly, with knowledge they'd never bothered to protect. Every line of code, every process improvement, every innovation they were claiming as their intellectual property had been documented, time-stamped, and traced back to my personal development work. But the real satisfaction came at 2:30 p.m., when I got a LinkedIn notification that made me set down my coffee and stare at my screen in disbelief. Vernon's profile had been updated. No longer CEO. No longer anything. Just a generic seeking new opportunities message that screamed career suicide. I didn't gloat. I didn't even react. I just opened a new browser tab and got back to work, building the kind of company I'd always wanted to work for, one that valued intelligence over politics, innovation over bureaucracy, and results over rhetoric. 6 months later, I'm writing this from the corner office of Meridian Strategic Solutions, overlooking the same city that once felt like an impossible dream. My team consists of 4 brilliant people who were also undervalued by their previous employers. Our client list includes 3 companies that fired us for being too expensive, and 2 that poached us from our former firms. Vernon's old company? They shuttered the consulting division last month. Apparently, without someone to quietly hold the entire operation together, they discovered that their lean efficiency model was actually just systematic exploitation with a marketing budget. I still get emails from former colleagues asking if I'm hiring. I always respond the same way: we're always looking for exceptional talent. Are you tired of being undervalued? Some bridges don't deserve to be burned gradually. Some deserve to be obliterated so completely that you can't even remember why you thought you needed them in the first place. The quiet ones aren't usually quiet by choice. We're quiet because we're listening, learning, and building something better while everyone else is talking. But when we finally speak up, the whole world pays attention. This isn't just a story about workplace revenge. It's about recognizing your own worth when everyone around you is determined to undervalue it. It's about understanding that loyalty is a transaction, not a character trait. And it's about knowing that sometimes the best way to prove your value is to take it somewhere else. Thanks for reading, fellow corporate survivors. If this story resonated with you, you're probably ready to stop asking for respect and start demanding it. The only question left is, what are you going to build with the skills they never appreciated? Subscribe for more stories about people who stopped playing by rules designed to keep them small.